Season 2 got its latest update this week, adding in new weapon core levels, perfect for making Devourer even more of a punching bag than he already is. But the new Void Erosion Purge runs have done a great job at gatekeeping a lot of the community from higher levels. Of course, we're all after those top tier rewards and the bragging rights on that leaderboard, so I'm here to help you out. So in this video, we'll be looking at my 5 top tips to be able to help you out with your Purge run grinds, discussing things from Descendants, to weapons, to enemies, and things in between. If all that sounds good to you, stick around and let's get to it. So one of the first things that I do want to talk about, one of my top tips, is discussing what are the best Descendants for you to be using across all the Purge levels. Now, to be fair, a few of these do actually change depending on the level that you are going for, because as you start going through all those higher levels, skill builds become less useful than they do at the start. Now, for example, you can use Inez all the way up to level 25, including even maybe 26 that I've heard some reported cases, but she does drop off quite hard once you manage to get to 26, 27, and then you will be relying on gun builds to be able to try and grab you all the way through from there. Now, if you are looking to be able to get a good, strong skill build to be able to take you through, there are only 2 real recommendations that I would possibly actually put to you. In this case, one of them is going to be Inez. By using Inez and using the typical build that you would have been using all the way up to level 20, you can still get really far and be able to get, like I said, to 25, 26, and you'll still be massively grinding and being able to complete those levels quite quickly. The plus side is that she gets a massive movement speed if you use her skill 4, and skill 4 is really fantastic at being able to set up a nice extra damage when using a skill 1 for all the bounces that are going to be happening. So she is really nimble, she is really quick, and she is fast and being able to get a lot of DPS pretty much cranked out. So she is fantastic at being able to deal with those early stages, especially with the mobbing. Now, once enemies start getting a little bit more HP and they become a little bit more tanky, you probably will need to be able to move from Inez, especially some of the levels where they are resistant to that electric element, and you will need to be able to start gravitating towards either some gun Descendants, or you'll be able to use a different Descendant which is going to be skill based, and this is the other one I'm going to recommend to you, and this is going to be Absolute Zero Viessa. Now, the reason why Ab Zero Viessa is fantastic at being able to go through some of these Purge runs is the fact that some of the later levels will require you to be able to do more chill damage to enemies, as they are particularly weak against that kind of element, and that's where Viessa actually comes in. The reason why Absolute Zero is the best one, though, is the fact that Absolute Zero allows you to be able to do Frostbite across a bunch of enemies, and Frostbite is a fantastic crowd control, being able to instantly freeze enemies in place, being able to just, you know, take up a little bit of heat off you and your team, but also being able to keep them in place for some of your skills, be able to pair this up with an Albion cavalry gun to be able to do even more crowd control. Essentially, all the mobs that will ever spawn just cannot move, and it just means that she is fantastic to be able to do it. Obviously, the fact that she does have 100% critical hit rate as well, being able to do massive amounts of damage, really does kind of help out in that regard as well. But she's got so much going for her, and that means that you can kind of use her as a combination of the two. You can pair her up with an Albion cavalry gun to be able to do a combination of a gun and skill build. Obviously, she does then drop off a little bit as you get to some of those later levels, because skills just kind of aren't really cutting it, and you do need to be able to lean heavily into gun builds. But the fact that you can do 26, 27, in fact I farm quite often with level 25 by using Absolute Zero Viessa, and she is absolutely smashing, being able to like decimate some of the enemies that pretty much spawn in that level. So therefore, being able to use this kind of build that you just have it in your back pocket, you can absolutely swap to and be able to farm out some of those earlier levels. Now, as for gun builds, you're going to be needing one of these pretty much across every single one of the levels. You're going to need this to be able to actually swap back and forth between, depending on the level that you're going to be doing. So obviously, skill builds are a little bit more effective in the early days. When it comes to the later levels, you will be relying on these heavy gun builds to be able to start carrying you through. The best of which is going to be obviously Haley. Haley is fantastic at being able to get your crit rate up with any of your guns. I like to pair my Haley with an Excava. I've recently done a video covering how you'd be able to make a crit build with your Excava by using Haley. Once again, is absolutely fantastic, especially for the ones where they're electric, or they're weak to electric, like the status from that. Yeah, going in heavily into Excava is an absolute bullet machine, especially getting all the weapon cores to level 10. You can farm the early levels, but we'll cover that a little bit later. Yeah, make sure you try and get your weapon cores up as high as possible, and then start taking it into that later content. She's also absolutely amazing if you do pair her with Albion cavalry gun. That is obviously going to provide some nice utility to the rest of the team. It's going to do some nice damage as well, because obviously you are leaning into the crit builds when it comes to Haley, so you can maximize out on those general rounds kind of mods to be able to help you out, obviously in that kind of side of things. So you will be doing respectful damage, but at the same time you will be helping out with the crowd control. But essentially you can get away with a lot of things when it comes to Haley, because she just pretty much is pretty much the go-to when it comes to like maximized DPS. Now there are two other Descendants that pretty much would be recommended here that have been seeing some really nice success by going into those runs. One of which is going to be Enzo. Enzo is fantastic being able to help out the whole team. He's being able to constantly give them ammo so they don't have to worry about being able to get those drops from the kills. You're able to massively increase the amount of critical hit rate as well, so you've got that going for you. Enzo's got some really nice survivability, pretty much like the fallback of the team is pretty much going to be the medic, is going to be the overall support, and then Glay is going to be another DPS monster, but they're obviously going to be on the side of unlimited ammo. I have seen some builds of Glay being able to use Restored Relic to be able to do some massive amounts of damage, and being able to crank out some really nasty kind of numbers that are going to be popping up on your screen. So make sure that you do have a Glay pretty much kept up. So if you are looking to be able to go into all these runs, the main 5 Descendants that you should be keeping up and keep geared are going to be Inez and Absolute Zero Viesa to be able to help you out with skill builds, and then Haley, Enzo and Glay, which are going to be your gun Descendants, and then from there you can then start building a couple others. But pretty much just to kind of wrap this up, essentially when it comes to skill builds, you will be primarily using Inez, but you will be mixing in some Absolute Zero Viesa to be able to help you out with some of those chill levels. And then on the gun build side of things, Haley, Enzo and Glay are absolutely fantastic. There is actually a case to be made for Lepic, because Lepic has some really nice kind of like utility from his gravity build. So if you have got that alongside, then definitely feel free to be able to use that in a team comp, but I feel like that needs a little bit more coordination compared to everything else. So if you are looking to be able to help out with the DPS, especially when it comes to the bossing side of things, then you definitely want to be relying on those 3 first. So now we've covered that tip, we can move on to our second one, and that is going to be talking about what weapons you should be taking in. Now obviously, what is the point of having a good gun build if you do not have the right weapon to be able to take you in? And some of these are absolutely fantastic options to be able to take in, and each of them kind of has a specific role to be able to be played. Now if you go into your Void Erosion Purge map, you can see what kind of resistance we should be kind of gearing towards. In the most cases, we need to be aiming towards chill and electric, as you can see as we start whisking our way through. You can see a couple of them are going to be toxic, but there aren't any very good toxic kind of weapons that currently exist, so you can absolutely blast through those with skill builds. It's when you get to like the chill and the electric ones, because obviously they're starting to have a little bit more resistance towards that kind of side of things, more commonly used against Inez. You will need some weapons to be able to help you out taking out that. So the main ones that are pretty much kind of like gearing themselves towards in the community are the ones that I've kind of like seen personally use myself. Excava is absolutely amazing for high single target DPS for the electric side of things. If you are looking to be able to crank out a massive amount of damage, I do have a build which recently came onto the channel, but I have also managed to put in some weapon cores into there to the level 10, and I have been seeing close to 1 mil crits on every single bullet, which is kind of nutty. It is really nasty damage that you can pretty much crank out when it comes to Excava, and the fact that you can go into a crit build, you can use it with Haley, is absolutely fantastic. It can if you manage to get the right kind of like magazine size increases as well, you can turn it into basically an LMG, which is kind of nutty. So Excava is absolutely fantastic to be able to help you out with those electric side of things. One, because it already has a roll into electric, so you can then pair that up really nicely, being able to go into your modules as well as your reinforcement to be able to help increase that even further. So yeah, overall I think it's a really nice kind of platform to be able to lean into with that. On the plus side, we also have Albion Cavalry Gun. We have to already kind of like briefly touch this already, but essentially this is a massive way of being able to do some insane kind of like crowd control. This kind of especially shines in the ones where they're weak to chill, because we already have a chill element that's already built into the gun, and obviously you can increase this even further by going into modules as well as being able to go into your reinforcement. But the fact that it is able to do insane amounts of damage, not as high as the Enduring Legacy, but it's still respectful damage, and then on top of that you're able to do some massive crowd control with the stun effect, which is from the branching off bullets. It's just kind of nutty. Overall, you can kind of see that Albion Cavalry Gun is kind of like the community favourite to be able to lean towards. It's stopping enemies from being able to attack you, which means that they're not going to be one-shotting you as often, but it's also able to do a decent amount of damage, and it's able to soften up other targets, so obviously it is a fantastic weapon to be able to start going into as well. One other weapon that is obviously still quite useful here is going to be the Voltia. Voltia is still able to get through all those elemental shields. As you start going up through the levels, it's going to be a little bit more stubborn for you to be able to crack open those shields, and obviously they're absorbing so much damage. Even if you are matching the right element to the resistance as well and what they're weak to, it still takes a good chunk of bullets to be able to get your way through those, even at weapon core 10s. So Voltia is a great way of being able to open up all of that because of its intrinsic ability, and you're able to essentially just kind of smash it open, and then you can start doing all the damage to the right enemies that are inside that shield. So Voltia is still a really nice utility weapon to just kind of like swap over to, just to be able to crack open the shields and then swap back to your main weapon. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as your primary damage dealer, but I must admit I don't have it fully geared up with weapon cores all the way up to level 10, so maybe I'm just kind of like a little bit off when it comes to the damage calculations, but I'd still rely on something else to be able to help me out in that kind of side of things. And the last one that I would recommend is going to be Restored Relic. Restored Relic has really kind of been making its rounds from some clips that exist in the community of people using Glay, people using Enzo, going into crit builds with it to be able to go into massive rates of fire. It does need some heavy investment into it, but you can essentially get some really nice work done off this. Personally, I'm currently working on being able to get my right weapon cores to be able to help me out in that kind of aspect, but it is doing some really nasty work. The only downside to using Restored Relic is that if you go into public lobbies, not everyone is expecting it, and that does mean that they might not necessarily have turned off the option to be able to get rid of the explosion. If that's the case, then you will essentially be blocking their screen of all the targets that they can actually shoot at. So, you know, just keep in mind, if you start seeing a couple of people leave, that's pretty much the reason why. But Restored Relic is fantastic, and it is definitely worthwhile being able to include on this list. So moving on to my third tip is the fact that movement is key to your survival and being able to include your environment in that. Now, there are a few examples where certain enemies are able to kind of like get around that, but they cannot get around all of your movements. Now, the main kind of aspect to this, and none of this is kind of like more key than being able to show off level 21, if you use Inez and you activate your skill 4 constantly all the time, you'll essentially be able to kind of like keep up that massive increase to your movement speed, and enemies will not be able to hit you. This allows you to be able to go a little bit more squishy when it comes to building into Inez, so you can actually maximize into DPS, and you'll still be more than enough to be able to actually get all the way through the level and still be able to clear it within 3 to 4 minutes. Now, fortunately, movement speed there is just crucial. You can see as to like what it's doing because there isn't as much cover that exists inside of level 21. But when you start going into the certain areas where it's pretty much more corridor focused and everything like that, everything's a little bit more of a choke point, and you can actually use cover a little bit more effectively there. Now, in some cases, especially at level 28, you will be introduced to the Order of Truth that do have access to wardens. We'll be talking about enemies a little bit later on in terms of a future point, but some of these are able to kind of like do an arc of their abilities, and that will allow them to be able to hit you from behind cover. So that's one thing that you do need to be aware of, is the fact that moving from cover to cover is fantastic. It's almost necessary to be able to get through some of these levels, especially while you're cranking out some of that DPS that's going to be heading their way. Now, a few of the things that can help you out in this situation are things like grappling. So mid-air maneuvering is a fantastic mod to be able to slot in. That's going to be able to help you to be able to Spider-Man your way out of trouble, out of danger, and you can essentially just get yourself out of a sticky situation by just pretty much just zipping all the way over the heads or around them in the first place to be able to find another piece of cover. Another one that I've found that really kind of helps out, and specific to Haley, is the fact that you can activate your skill 2, and your skill 2 did like a massive circle that's around yourself to be able to push enemies away. Now, this does also put them in a stun animation in a kind of sense. It's not like a specific stun, but it does push them back and they cannot act, and that allows you to be able to now obviously hit them with your kind of like your charge beam, the one that pretty much everyone kind of uses against Colossus. Now, one downside to using this is that even though it is effective at enemies that try to rush into melee range and you can't deal with them in time, like for specific elites, you will then be massively vulnerable to any other elites or any other enemies that pretty much exist. So you kind of want to do this behind some cover as well, but essentially this is kind of like your get out of jail free card. If you know that you're about to be bum rushed, you can activate this, and this will give you a little bit of kind of like breathing room, give you a couple of seconds to be able to then start moving and be able to like get yourself out of danger that way. So tip number 4 is to use that public matchmaking button that you can see on levels 21 and 25 to help you farm up those currency and cores, so you can then start producing those level 10 cores to help you out in later levels. Now, you don't necessarily need to rush your way through Void Erosion Purge. Currently in the difficulty level that the developers have set, this pretty much is our endgame content to really kind of like push some of our builds, and we are getting rewarded by obviously getting the cores to be able to push the guns even further, but it's one of those that's you kind of need to grind out to be able to get level 10s. It's all well and good being able to combine cores to be able to help us out, but we do need to be able to actually get some of the decent currency to be able to help us out, because at the end of the day we're not guaranteeing the rolls we're getting, so we do need to be able to get a decent amount of level 10 cores, and then we need to try and re-roll so that we get some decent values. Now, the ways that I've been doing to be able to get my level 10 cores to really help me out on some of these weapons is by going into public matchmaking on level 21 and 25, because it doesn't seem to really affect the HP or the density of the enemies or anything like that. It's just extra people to be able to help me out with the firepower, and I'm helping them in the same respect that they're helping me. Now, primarily, if you can do 25 easily, I would recommend doing 25, but if you can't and you just want to be able to just easily get through a level to be able to get some resource and be able to help you out, then I do think 21 is going to be the best place for you to be able to use. Now, the main difference between level 21 and 25 is that at level 21 you will be getting 6 of the tier 6 orbs all the way across the board, and you will get 31 of the core amplifiers, whereas if you get into level 25 you will be getting 10 of the level 6 cores all the way across, and you'll get 35 of the core amplifiers. Now, obviously, if you are doing 21 on a 3 to 4 minute kind of basis, if you are managing to complete it, I do think this will give you more kind of like an outcome of a core amplifier, but in terms of like higher drops, in terms of like the other cores to help you make level 10 cores, then level 25 is going to be the one that's going to help you out the most. So depending on the type of resource that you're after, if you're after more cores to be able to make level 10 cores, then I would recommend being able to do level 25 in public lobbies. But if you are looking to be able to get more of the combining resource, which is going to be the core amplifier, then I do think that you can complete level 21 much faster as in-airs, and you can do it in a public matchmaking, so that you can get these like reliably, you can get these to drop quite a lot in decent quantities, and by the time that you've managed to do a couple of these, you'll then have enough to be able to make a couple of level 10 cores. As your build starts getting a little bit better and you start feeling a little bit more confident pushing some of these higher levels, then you can start doing the public matchmaking in level 28s and 29s to be able to help you get some of those level 10 drops to be able to happen in the first place. But obviously, if you are looking to be able to start off and you'd be able to give yourself a nice little power boost, then I do recommend being able to do level 21 and level 25 as a public matchmaking to really kind of help you out from the start. And as we move on to my last tip, this is going to be more to do with the mobs that are going to be spawning inside the level. And in this case, we're going to be focusing on relevant targets, because not all enemies are pretty much made the same. So you will be needing to focus on certain more like dangerous, more prioritized targets before you then start taking out the rest of the trash. Most notably, when it comes to level 21s to 30, you will be noticing that champions, or elites in this case, will have even more HP, to the point that some of them will feel like they are basically the HP bars of Colossi. Like those kind of fights. It is kind of nutty as to how much they pretty much exist, and yes, they are pretty much bullet sponges, but some of these elites are more deadly than others. Now, of course, because we will be getting like 2-3 taps in some of these levels if we're not using our cover carefully, it's about knowing which ones are going to be the more dangerous ones. For example, if you are going against the Legion of Darkness, like certain levels will have, you will be seeing elites that are going to be called the Living Artilleries. Now, these ones can usually one-shot you. These ones are very, very deadly if you're not paying attention, and especially as playing as an Inez in level 21, you absolutely can get one-shot by these. So it is worthwhile being able to keep a little bit of distance so you can actually avoid their projectiles, but at the same time, you obviously want to be able to get some of your skills so you can actually start landing it and then being able to get them off the field as fast as possible. As another example, destroyers for the Order of Truth are pretty much kind of like the worst ones to be able to go against. While they aren't necessarily the pains themselves, they are going to be throwing kind of like a spanner in the works towards you, because they will be bum rushing you, they will get in melee range, they will do it quite quickly. While they won't be one-shotting you, they will be forcing you to panic, will be forcing you to be able to separate from your teammates, be able to force you out of cover, and it's once you actually get into that kind of panic state that the rest of the mob will essentially just pick you up. Things like Wardens, things like Annihilators, things like that, anything that's really like a big heavy hitter can really start ruining ruining your day as soon as you're out of that cover. And while we did just kind of like talk about Wardens, I will also kind of like group in the Grenadiers as well. Because both of these can leave hazards on the floor, and they can also try and hit you around cover as well. The Wardens and Grenadiers are able to chuck their projectiles up and then throw it in an arc. They will have decent tracking in terms of where you were when they first activated the skill, so if you don't move quickly enough, if you don't spot the projectiles, they really can wreck your day. Grenadiers can stick their grenades onto you, which means that if you then walk into your rest of your team, you're going to have a bad day. Wardens can leave their poison grenades on the floor, and if you then walk into them, they're kind of like proximity mines. They will do heavy amounts of damage. One single cast of a Warden is more than enough to be able to actually down someone in some of these levels, so it is kind of crazy. So it definitely can result in easy downs if you're not paying attention. So it is one of those that if you're playing solo, you're in for a bad time, but if you play with like teammates and everything like that, they will be able to pick you up in most cases, but Wardens are absolute nightmare and definitely the bane of my existence. So I would recommend that if you are going into any of these levels, if you see any of these targets, prioritize these over everything else. Living Artillery, Destroyers, Grenadiers and Wardens are all elites with massive HP pools, so they are worth your time to be able to focus fire these down, so work with your team to be able to get these off the field as quickly as possible. And with all that out of the way, that wraps it up on the video for the top 5 tips I've learned from Purge runs, perfect for me to be able to pass down to yourselves. Overall, I'm kind of enjoying this difficulty ramp and new power levels of weapon cores. That said, I don't think that Nexon got it quite right, as just making enemies bullet sponges more than most Colossus fights, but also making the latter stages nigh on impossible to do solo without some kind of cheese, just doesn't feel accessible to the most part. Not at all calling for a nerf to the content, it's way too early to say that's needed, but I can kinda see why the calls are already out in force. But this is a section I want to hear from you. How are you finding Season 2 so far? What Purge level are you currently up to? What are your thoughts when it comes to the difficulty of the Void Erosion Purge, especially with the later levels? And lastly, which weapon guide would you like to see updated with these brand new core unlocks? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. As I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.